She thought a $20 Nevada marriage certificate to a nameless human was her only escape from a cruel, fated mate. But when Charlotte woke the next morning, her cheap motel room didn't smell like a human. It smelled of ozone, cedar, and the terrifying, commanding aura of the Alpha King. The rain in Silver Springs, Nevada, didn't wash things clean. It only made the grime stick to the pavement. Charlotte stood shivering beneath the flickering neon sign of the Chapel of Everlasting Love, clutching her damp trench coat tightly around her slender frame. Her scent suppressants were wearing off. She could feel the itch beneath her skin, the terrifying realization that her inner wolf was beginning to broadcast her distress to anyone within a 10-mile radius. She was an omega. In the hierarchy of the werewolf world, that meant she was a prize, a commodity, a creature meant to submit. And tomorrow, on her 21st birthday, Alpha Darian of the Blood Moon Pack would legally and ritually claim her. Darian didn't love her. He was a monster who collected rare bloodlines, a tyrant who had already left bruised fingerprints on her arms just for looking away when he spoke. But Charlotte knew a loophole. Pack law was ancient and absolute. An alpha could not claim a female who was already legally bound in marriage to another under human law. Not without killing the husband. If she married a human, Darian would be trapped. He couldn't kill a human without drawing the attention of the Lycan High Council and exposing their kind to the human world. It was a desperate, crazy plan. But it was all she had. She pushed open the heavy glass doors of the chapel. The air inside smelled of stale cigarettes, cheap vanilla air freshener, and spilled whiskey. Behind a faux marble counter, a woman with a name tag that read Brenda was aggressively chewing gum and scrolling through her phone. "I need to get married," Charlotte blurted out, her voice trembling. "Tonight." Brenda popped a bubble. "Need a license and a groom, honey. I only provide the pastor and the paperwork. Pastor Gregory Hughes is sleeping in the back. You got $50? Charlotte's heart sank. She had the $50, but she was entirely lacking a groom. She had hoped to bribe a drunk or a transient just to sign the paper. She turned toward the door, a sob building in her throat, when the bells above the entrance chimed. A man stepped out of the torrential downpour and into the dim light of the chapel. Charlotte's breath hitched. He was tall, impossibly tall, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that looked entirely out of place in a dingy Nevada border town. Water dripped from his dark hair, framing a jawline carved from granite. His eyes, a striking, piercing amber, swept the room before landing on her. He didn't smell like a wolf. He smelled like expensive cologne, rain, and cold cash. A human. A very wealthy, very intimidating human. "Is this the only place open?" the stranger asked, his voice a low, resonant baritone that sent an involuntary shiver down Charlotte's spine. "Only chapel for 50 miles, mister," Brenda said, suddenly sitting up straighter. The man checked a heavy silver watch on his wrist. "Good. I need a proxy bride. I have until midnight to file a marriage certificate with the state, or my grandfather's trust defaults to a board of directors. I will pay $100,000 to any woman willing to sign her name." Charlotte's mind raced. It was too perfect. It was a miracle dropped straight from the stormy sky. She stepped forward, ignoring the trembling of her hands. "I don't want your money," Charlotte said, lifting her chin. "I just need your name on a marriage certificate. Tomorrow you can go your way, and I'll go mine. It's a matter of life and death." The stranger looked down at her. For a fraction of a second, Charlotte thought she saw a flash of something wild and predatory in his amber eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a smooth, calculated calm. "A matter of life and death," he repeated softly, stepping closer. "What are you running from, little bird?" "An abusive ex," Charlotte lied smoothly, knowing a human wouldn't understand the concept of a fated mate. He thinks he owns me. If I'm married, it complicates his legal hold over me. That's all you need to know." The man stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Then, the corner of his mouth twitched upward into a devastating smirk. "Very well. I am Stefan. Charlotte. Charlotte Jenkins." Stefan gestured toward the counter. "Wake up the pastor, Brenda. We have a wedding to attend." 10 minutes later, Pastor Gregory Hughes, smelling faintly of bourbon and looking thoroughly confused, stood before them in a wrinkled robe. Charlotte and Stefan stood side by side. The sheer physical presence of the man beside her was overwhelming. He radiated heat. When he took her hand to slide a cheap, stainless steel chapel ring onto her finger, his touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to her core. Her inner Omega, usually a cowering and terrified creature, suddenly purred. Charlotte forced the feeling down. It was just adrenaline. "By the power vested in me by the state of Nevada," Pastor Hughes mumbled, stamping the legal document with a heavy thud. "I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." "That won't be necessary," Charlotte said quickly, snatching her copy of the certificate. Stefan didn't move. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. "It's done, Charlotte Jenkins. You are legally bound to me." "Thank you," she whispered, the crushing weight of Darian's impending claim lifting from her chest. "I know a cheap motel down the road. We can hide out there until morning, and then we go our separate ways." Stefan offered his arm, the perfect gentleman. "Lead the way, wife." The Starlight Motel was a run-down establishment where the neon vacancy sign was missing half its letters, sputtering a faint red glow onto the wet asphalt. Room 14 smelled of old dust and bleach. Exhausted to her very bones, Charlotte had claimed the sagging double bed. Stefan, remarkably unbothered by the squalor, had taken off his suit jacket and sat in the single, stained armchair by the window, keeping watch in the dark. Charlotte had fully expected to lie awake in terror, listening for the howling of blood moon trackers. Instead, the rhythmic sound of Stefan's breathing acted like a sedative. She fell into the deepest, most dreamless sleep she had experienced in years. She woke to the sound of rain tapping against the window pane. Grey morning light filtered through the thin, yellowed curtains. Charlotte stretched, a momentary feeling of peace washing over her, until she took a breath. Her eyes snapped open. The air in the room was completely different. The stale smell of bleach was gone. In its place was an overwhelming, suffocating scent of dark pine, crushed cedar, and heavy, crackling ozone. It was the scent of a predator. No, not just a predator. An alpha. Her inner wolf immediately dropped its belly to the floor in her mind, whining in absolute, terrifying submission. It was a reflex, completely out of her control. Charlotte bolted upright, clutching the thin bedsheets to her chest. Stefan was standing by the window. He had discarded his dress shirt. His broad, muscular back was mapped with a series of brutal, jagged silver scars. Silver. The only thing that could scar a werewolf. He turned around slowly. His amber eyes were no longer human. They were glowing with a terrifying, molten gold light. The aura radiating from him was so heavy it felt like gravity in the room had doubled. Charlotte gasped for air, her lungs struggling against the sheer, oppressive power of his dominance. "You're—" Charlotte stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "You're a wolf, but you had no scent." "Scent blockers are a wonderful invention, little Omega," Stefan said, his voice dropping an octave, rumbling with a terrifying, inhuman bass. "Though they are dreadfully uncomfortable." "You're an alpha," she breathed, terror seizing her heart. She had run from one monster straight into the arms of another. "Not just an alpha, Charlotte," Stefan said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward the bed. and neither are you just an Omega." Before Charlotte could process his words, the wooden door of room 14 exploded inward. Splinters rained across the cheap carpet. Charlotte screamed, scrambling backward against the headboard, as 3 massive men stepped through the ruined doorway. The scent of rotting leaves and stagnant water filled the room, the stench of the Blood Moon pack. At the front stood Trent, Darian's sadistic beta. He sneered, shaking the rain from his leather jacket, his eyes locking onto Charlotte. "Did you really think a piece of human paper was going to save you, you stupid bitch?" Trent laughed, cracking his knuckles. "Alpha Darian is furious. He's going to strip the flesh from your bones before he mates you. And as for the human you picked up..." Trent finally dragged his gaze toward Stefan, who stood completely still near the window. Trent grinned, bearing elongated canines. "I'm going to enjoy ripping his throat out." Stefan didn't look afraid. He didn't even look annoyed. He looked bored. "You're tracking mud on the carpet," Stefan noted mildly. "I'm going to track your blood on the ceiling," Trent snarled, his eyes flashing yellow as he launched himself across the room. Charlotte squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the gruesome sound of the human being torn apart. Instead, there was a sickening crunch, followed by a choked, wet gasp. Charlotte opened her eyes. Stefan hadn't shifted into his wolf form. He hadn't even fully moved from his spot. Yet his hand was wrapped entirely around Trent's throat, holding the massive beta 3 feet in the air. Trent was clawing desperately at Stefan's arm, his eyes bulging in pure, unadulterated terror. The 2 Blood Moon enforcers froze, their wolves instinctively recognizing a power so immense it paralyzed them. Stefan's aura exploded, no longer contained. It shattered the motel room's window and blew the curtains into the wind. The sheer force of his presence slammed the 2 enforcers to their knees. They hit the floor so hard the floorboards groaned, unable to lift their heads, whimpering like beaten pups. "You dare bare your fangs at my mate," Stefan whispered, his voice echoing like thunder in the small room. Trent gurgled, blood dripping from his lips as Stefan's grip tightened. You, who?" "I'm Stefan Sterling," he growled softly. "Alpha King of the Northern Lycan Court, and you are trespassing in my presence." Charlotte's heart stopped. The Alpha King, the myth, the ruthless conqueror who ruled the Northern Territories with an iron, blood-soaked fist. Stefan tossed Trent to the side like a discarded rag doll. The beta hit the wall and slumped to the floor, unconscious and broken. Stefan wiped his hands on a towel from the bathroom, turning his glowing, golden eyes back to Charlotte, who was trembling uncontrollably on the bed. "Why?" Charlotte cried out, tears of panic finally spilling over. "Why would the Alpha King pretend to be a human in a Nevada chapel?" "Why me?" Stefan smiled, and it was a terrifying, beautiful thing. He walked over to the bed and leaned down, trailing a calloused thumb across her trembling jawline. "Did you really think, Charlotte, that you managed to bump into the one man who could protect you by pure accident?" Stefan murmured, his voice laced with dark amusement. "Darian has been encroaching on my borders for months. I needed to send him a message. What better way to break a tyrant than to steal his most prized, fated possession right out from under his nose?" Charlotte stared at him, the horrifying truth dawning on her. "You didn't save me," she whispered. "You trapped me." "I claimed what is mine," Stefan corrected, leaning in until his lips brushed her ear. "Welcome to the royal court, my queen. Your honeymoon has officially begun." Within 20 minutes, the squalid Nevada motel was swarming with men in tactical gear bearing the insignia of Vanguard Security Group, a private military contractor that the human world believed guarded overseas oil pipelines, but which actually served as the Alpha King's personal elite guard. Charlotte was ushered out of the rain and into the back of a bulletproof Maybach. Stefan sat beside her, the partition raised, sealing them in a tense, suffocating silence. The overwhelming scent of ozone and cedar flooded the confined space. Charlotte pressed herself against the leather door, her mind spinning with a terrifying cocktail of betrayal and awe. "You orchestrated this," Charlotte finally said, her voice shaking but laced with a newfound, desperate anger. "You knew exactly who I was. You were waiting at the Chapel of Everlasting Love." Stefan didn't look at her. He was typing methodically on a sleek, encrypted tablet. "I was tracking Darian's movements through a mole in his financial department. When I learned he was accelerating his claiming ceremony, I knew you would run. The chapel was the only logical loophole a desperate Omega could use within a 50-mile radius of the Blood Moon border. I simply ensured I was the only viable human groom in the building." "You used me as a pawn!" Charlotte yelled, slamming her hand against the plush armrest. "You're no better than Darian. You just wanted to humiliate a rival alpha." Stefan stopped typing. Slowly he turned his head. His amber eyes caught the passing streetlights, flashing with a dangerous, predatory gold. He leaned across the spacious cabin, crowding her space until she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. If I merely wanted to humiliate Darian, I would have burned his territory to the ground and mounted his head on a spike in downtown Reno, Stefan murmured, his voice a lethal, silken purr. "I did not bind myself to a stranger for petty revenge, Charlotte. I did it because you are not who you think you are." Charlotte froze. "What are you talking about?" Stefan reached into a leather briefcase at his feet and pulled out a manila folder, tossing it onto her lap. It bore the heavy, wax seal of Faulkner, Hughes and Partners, a ruthlessly exclusive supernatural law firm based out of London. "Open it," he commanded softly. With trembling fingers, Charlotte flipped open the file. Inside were yellowed birth certificates, property deeds dating back to the late 1800s, and a faded photograph of a woman who looked terrifyingly like an older version of Charlotte herself. The woman had striking silver-blonde hair and eyes like polished ice. "That is Amelia Croft," Stefan explained, his tone shifting into something almost resembling reverence. "The last true White Wolf of the Silver Peak clan. She was murdered 20 years ago in a territorial ambush. The world believed her infant daughter died with her in the fire." Charlotte's breath hitched. "No, my parents were human. They died in a car crash. I was put into the foster system before Darian found me." "Darian didn't find you, Charlotte," Stefan interrupted, his jaw tightening. "He placed you there. He killed your mother. He hid you in the human system, waiting for your wolf to present, waiting until you were old enough to legally claim. Because the moment you are mated, your husband inherits the Croft estate, and the Croft estate owns the mineral rights to the largest untapped silver vein in North America." The world tilted on its axis. The horrific abuse, the relentless tracking, Darian's obsessive, suffocating need to claim her. It wasn't about fate. It wasn't about her being a rare Omega. It was about greed. It was about real estate, power, and billions of dollars hidden beneath the Nevada dirt. He murdered my mother for a silver mine?" Charlotte whispered, a single tear cutting through the grime on her cheek. "He is a parasite," Stefan growled, the sound vibrating against the windows of the Maybach. "But by signing that cheap piece of paper with me tonight, you outmaneuvered him. The Croft inheritance is now legally bound to the Northern Lycan Court. Darian has lost his prize, his funding, and his mind." "So I am just a land deed to you," Charlotte said bitterly, looking away. "A political acquisition." Stefan reached out, his large, calloused hand gently but firmly gripping her chin, forcing her to look back at him. The sheer intensity in his gaze made her inner wolf whimper, not in fear, but in profound, instinctual confusion. "I am the Alpha King, little bird," Stefan said softly. "I have more wealth than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I did not cross the continent for silver." "Then why?" she breathed. "Because 20 years ago, Amelia Croft saved my life when I was a pup," Stefan confessed, the heavy walls of his stoic demeanor cracking just a fraction. "And because when you walked into that chapel tonight, terrified and dripping wet, my wolf realized something that my tactical mind didn't anticipate." He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of her ear, sending a wildfire of shivers down her spine. "You are my true mate, Charlotte, and I will burn the world to ash before I let Darian touch a single hair on your head." The revelation hit her like a physical blow, the absolute stillness of her panic, the way her inner wolf had purred at his touch in the chapel. It wasn't adrenaline. It was the mate bond snapping into place, masked by his scent suppressants. She hadn't run from her fate. She had run directly into it. The Maybach pulled onto the private tarmac of Blackstone Aviation. A massive Gulfstream G650 sat waiting, its engines already whining in the torrential rain. Stefan stepped out, opening an umbrella and offering her his hand. Charlotte looked at the hand of the Alpha King. She was walking into a war. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't walking alone. She placed her small hand in his, and together they boarded the jet, leaving the ruins of her old life behind. The historic Harrison estate in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, was less of a home and more of a fortress carved into the side of a snow-capped mountain. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a sweeping, pine-covered valley. For 3 days, Charlotte had lived in absolute luxury, guarded by Stefan's beta, a towering, silent man named Gideon. Stefan had been preparing for the inevitable, and on the 4th day, the storm finally broke. Charlotte stood on the grand balcony of the main hall, her hands gripping the cold stone balustrade. Below, the sprawling courtyard was filled with an army of wolves. On one side, the disciplined, silent ranks of the northern Lycan court, clad in charcoal and silver. On the other, a chaotic, snarling mass of blood moon wolves, reeking of wet earth and aggression. At the center of the courtyard stood Darian. He was massive, built like a brick wall, his face contorted in an ugly sneer. Beside him stood an elderly man in a crimson robe, Lord Alastair, a prominent judge from the Lycan High Council. "Stefan Sterling!" Darian roared, his voice echoing off the mountain peaks. "You harbor a fugitive. You harbor my fated mate. By the ancient laws of the High Council, I demand her return, or I invoke the right of challenge." The heavy oak doors of the estate groaned open. Stefan walked out, completely unarmed, dressed in a simple black sweater and dark trousers. He moved with the terrifying grace of an apex predator, with absolutely nothing to fear. "You are trespassing on sovereign northern territory, Darian," Stefan said, his voice calm, yet it carried effortlessly over the growling crowd. "And you are claiming a woman who is legally my wife under human and pack law." Lord Alastair stepped forward, raising a golden staff. "Alpha Stefan, Alpha Darian claims the marriage was coerced under false pretenses. He claims the Omega, Charlotte, is his fated mate by birthright. If this is true, the human contract is void. The Council demands proof of your claim, or you must face the physical challenge." Darian laughed, a cruel, grating sound. "She is an Omega. She is weak, and she belongs in my bed. Give her to me, Stefan, or I will tear your throat out and take her from your corpse." Charlotte watched from the balcony, her heart pounding against her ribs. She remembered the bruises Darian had given her. She remembered the terror, But as she looked down at Stefan, who stood like an immovable mountain between her and her abuser, a strange, burning heat began to rise in her chest. It was the Croft bloodline, the White Wolf. For years, the abuse had kept her inner wolf suppressed, terrified into submission. But Stefan's presence, the realization of her true heritage, and the burgeoning mate bond had awakened something ancient and powerful inside her. "I accept the challenge," Stefan said smoothly, rolling up his sleeves. "No!" Charlotte screamed, her voice tearing through the courtyard, every eye turned upward. Charlotte didn't cower. She didn't hide. She turned and ran down the grand stone staircase, pushing past Gideon, and burst through the heavy oak doors, stepping out into the freezing Wyoming air. "Charlotte, go back inside," Stefan commanded, his eyes flashing with warning. "No," Charlotte said, walking until she stood directly beside the Alpha King. She stared dead into Darian's eyes. The Blood Moon Alpha sneered, trying to project his dominance to force her to her knees. The heavy, suffocating pressure of Darian's Alpha aura slammed into her. A week ago, it would have crushed her. Today, it felt like a gentle breeze against a stone wall. "You have no power over me, Darian," Charlotte said, her voice ringing clear and steady. "You murdered Amelia Croft. You stole my life, and you tried to steal my birthright. But I am not your Omega," Darian snarled, his eyes turning a poisonous yellow. "You belong to me. The bond—" "There is no bond," Charlotte interrupted. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the cheap $20 marriage certificate from the Chapel of Everlasting Love. She held it up for Lord Alistair to see. "Under human law, I am Charlotte Sterling. And under Lycan law—" Charlotte turned to Stefan. The Alpha King looked down at her, his amber eyes wide with a mixture of shock and profound pride. Charlotte reached up, grabbing the collar of Stefan's sweater, and pulled him down to her level. She didn't wait for permission. She crashed her lips against his in a bruising, desperate kiss. The moment their lips met, the suppressed mate bond exploded. A shockwave of pure, golden energy rippled across the courtyard. The air crackled with heavy ozone and the scent of winter pine. The absolute, undeniable proof of a fated match illuminated the space between them, so powerful that several blood moon wolves whimpered and took a step back. Charlotte broke the kiss, her eyes glowing with a brilliant, icy silver light, the mark of the White Wolf. She tilted her head, exposing the soft, vulnerable skin of her neck to Stefan. "Mark me," she whispered fiercely. "Claim me before the council." Stefan didn't hesitate. His eyes blazing with triumphant fire, his fangs descended. He sank his teeth into her mating gland. The pain was sharp, but it was immediately swallowed by a rush of euphoric, absolute belonging. Their souls violently tethered together, a permanent, unbreakable steel cable locking them as one. Charlotte gasped, falling against his chest. Stefan caught her, holding her securely against his heart. "The bond is true," Lord Alistair declared, banging his staff against the cobblestone. "The Alpha King and the White Wolf are mated. The Blood Moon claim is dissolved." Darian let out a roar of absolute fury. Stripped of his prize, his land, and his pride, he abandoned all pack law. He shifted mid-air, a massive, grotesque brown wolf launching itself directly at Charlotte's back. Stefan moved faster than the eye could track. He didn't even fully shift. He simply spun, catching the massive wolf by the throat mid-leap. With a sickening, brutal display of raw power, Stefan slammed Darian into the cobblestones. The earth shook. Bones shattered like glass. Darian whimpered once, and then lay completely still. The courtyard descended into a deafening silence. The Blood Moon wolves, seeing their alpha broken so effortlessly, immediately dropped to their bellies, exposing their throats in absolute submission to the Alpha King. Stefan stood up, his breathing barely elevated. He looked down at the ruined body of his rival, then turned his glowing amber eyes back to his mate. He reached out, gently wiping a stray flake of snow from Charlotte's cheek. "I told you," Stefan murmured, his voice softening into a velvet rumble meant only for her. "I will burn the world to ash before I let anyone hurt you." Charlotte leaned into his touch, the icy silver in her eyes fading back to her natural warm brown. She had run to a cheap Nevada chapel to buy a few days of freedom. Instead, she had bought a kingdom, reclaimed her legacy, and found the one monster in the world whose only desire was to protect her. She wasn't running anymore. She was exactly where she belonged. As the snow continued to fall over the Harrison estate, Charlotte looked out at the kneeling wolves, a profound sense of peace finally settling over her battered soul. Her desperate $20 gamble at a dingy Nevada chapel hadn't just saved her life. It had awakened a sleeping queen and brought her a fiercely devoted king. The terrifying storm was finally over. Here in the northern mountains, her reign had just begun.